World leaders actually use a lot Twitter, more and more. And I'd like to welcome from Burson-Marsteller, Matthias Lufkens, to talk about this. Are you a world leader?
I'm not a world leader. Are you?
You look like a world leader.
I just have my 20 minutes of fame here on stage. Good morning, everyone.
Please enjoy it.
Thank you very much. I'm standing between you and the French Minister of the Economy. So just a quick show of hands. Who of you is following presidents, prime ministers, or governments on Twitter, or likes them on Facebook? Well, maybe a third. Hard to say. Anyway, and over the next 20 minutes, I want to show you that their tweets and their posts are actually fascinating and really interesting. And you will see that digital diplomacy today is done in 140-character bursts. Twitter is a formidable tool to broadcast, but also to make connection with peers. And what we also see is that we see more and more that the tweets are less and less diplomatic, and we see more and more personal attacks and trolling. And my fear is that 2015 might actually become the year of digital warfare. So some of you might remember the talk I gave here on this stage 4 years ago in December 2011 about Twitter diplomacy. It was one of the first talks. At that time, there were just a handful of world leaders actively using Twitter. And today, I'm proud to say that we have identified 650 Twitter accounts of heads of state, heads of governments, their personal accounts and their institutional accounts. 130 presidents and prime ministers have a Twitter account, a personal Twitter account, and 67 foreign ministers. That's actually 80% of all the 193 UN governments. And the question always comes, do they tweet themselves? Well, we've seen some pushing the send button here. Pope Benedict sending the first tweet on the Pontifex account. And a couple of weeks ago, the Queen posted her first tweet on the British monarchy account, signed Elizabeth R, of course, for Regina. But I have to admit, very few world leaders actually do the tweeting themselves. Those who do are mainly in Northern Europe, on the shores of the Baltic Sea. This is Estonia's President Toomas Hendrik Ilves taking a selfie at the Estonian Song Festival with 25,000 singers in the background. He is somebody I really recommend you follow because he is very, very interesting. He does his personal tweets and very, very fascinating insight also into cyber security. Another one who does the tweets himself is the Prime Minister of Finland, Alex Stubb. Here we can see him in Copenhagen with his Danish counterpart, Helle Thorning-Schmidt, who is not on Twitter. And I like this tweet with the reference to Borgen, for those of you who know the the Danish TV series about a female prime minister in Denmark. So his selfie and his smiley. Actually, Alex Stubb loves to show off body parts. This is him getting ready for the annual meeting in Davos with his galoshes on his shoes. He does on his feet. He does like to share pictures of his shoes. Here, his latest weightlifting shoes. He is an avid triathlon runner. And here are his latest new bike shoes that he's used for his training in Lanzarote. And lastly, in midsummer in Finland, he relaxed by a lake, bare feet. Actually, I really, really enjoy the tweets of Alex Stubb. I think he's somebody who really understands how to engage his audiences, including selfies. But somebody who does selfies also very well is the Prime Minister of Malaysia here, Najib Razak. So whenever he meets a foreign guest, he will say, why don't we take a selfie? So here he is with Barack Obama. the president of Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan, and, of course, French President François Hollande. I love this picture. So, I mean, we can think about selfies what we want, but I think this is much more interesting, much more fun than handshake pictures. And we still see too many handshake pictures on the tweets, on the Twitter feeds of our leaders. So just for the record, Najib Razak is probably also the first world leader who is now using a selfie stick to engage his audience, which is quite interesting. And I think 2014 is really the year of the selfie, where the selfie craze had hit the higher echelons of government. This is the entire Swiss government, 7 federal councillors. Only one of them is actually active on Twitter, but he took this selfie at an offsite this year. I really found this interesting. And of course, an amateur photographer is the Russian Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev. Here he's taking a mirror selfie in an elevator to thank his 400,000 followers on Instagram. Medvedev is more on Instagram than Twitter. And the new Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, made history with this selfie, taking in the election booth. Yes, I voted, here's my selfie. Actually, Modi has become the 3rd most followed world leader after Barack Obama and the Pope. And he really has discovered Twitter is a great tool to reach millions of followers and large audiences. But if we look at the use of Twitter by governments, we can see that foreign ministers and foreign ministries, especially in Europe, use Twitter to make connections with their peers. So they will @mention each other, they will follow each other, and by following each other on Twitter, they can send each other direct messages. Now, we don't know how much is going on behind the scenes, but I have to say I have received my fair share of direct messages from world leaders, and apparently I'm not the only one. So there is this actually a network, a digital diplomatic network that has been created on Twitter among European foreign ministers. For the record, actually, the French foreign minister, Laurent Fabius, is the best connected foreign minister, actually world leader. He has 99 of his peers. He's mutually following 99 of his peers. And what is interesting, I just saw this morning in the newspaper here in Paris, Libération, actually, he doesn't have a computer on his desk, and he is also not tweeting personally, but it is his team which is doing the tweeting for him. But kudos to them, because they have really reached out, and they're actively reaching out to other world leaders. In second position, the European External Action Service, that's the Foreign Office of the European Union, followed by Russia's Foreign Ministry, the French Foreign Ministry, and the Swedish Foreign Ministry. So just for the record. So what does it mean to follow someone? Well, look at this. This is the Twitter account of Iranian's Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif, who made a splash last year on Twitter. And interestingly enough, the State Department is now following unilaterally the Iranian foreign minister, as well as the president, Hassan Rouhani. So what does that mean? These two countries are slowly re-establishing diplomatic relations through Twitter. It starts on Twitter. So far, neither Rouhani nor Zarif have reciprocated, but I think it is a first step. And during the nuclear talks in Geneva last year, they basically used Twitter to announce this preliminary agreement that they reached. And actually, during the talks, they also decided not to make any social media comments, not to scupper these private and secret talks. What we've seen this year, of course, is also hashtag diplomacy. Here's Michelle Obama trying to bring back our girls, or ending violence, especially violence against women. This is the foreign minister of Slovenia. And during the events in Ukraine, European foreign ministers really became actors in the events unfolding in Ukraine. This is Radek Sikorski, the former Polish foreign minister, standing in front of the toppled Lenin statue in Kiev for dessert under the pediment without Lenin. And actually, we've seen that because of the events in Ukraine, Twitter, or digital diplomacy on Twitter, has really become a digital battleground where influence is measured in terms of followers and retweets. This is the most retweeted tweet on the Kremlin account in Russian. The Kremlin also has an English account, and it was the agreement on the accession of the Republic of Crimea into the Russian Federation, which was signed. Just a week later, the State Department decided to counter this with the hashtag United for Ukraine. Most US missions tweeted the hashtag United for Ukraine, as did the Western allies on their accounts. Now, what do you think the Russian response was? Well, the Russians decided, the Russian Foreign Ministry, well, we can live with that hashtag too. So they actually started to use that same hashtag, United for Ukraine, really taking the oomph out of the hashtag campaign. Of course, we can argue that the Western allies got more retweets than the Russians did, but it is interesting how politics are now and diplomacy is now used through hashtags. The conflict turned sadly comic in August when the Canadian mission to NATO tweeted this guide for Russian soldiers who keep getting lost accidentally entering Ukraine, not Russia and Russia. Well, to that, the Russian mission to NATO replied with their own map, helping our Canadian colleagues to catch up with contemporary geography of Europe. And you will see that Crimea here is part of Russia. The conflict on Twitter turned belligerent in September when NATO tweeted new satellite images showing Russia's combat troops in Ukraine, to which the Russian mission to the United Arab Emirates tweeted this picture of mock toys and saying this is the latest evidence of Russian armor invading Ukraine has been leaked. So making fun of the tweet from NATO. For the Ukrainian foreign ministry, it's not as much, so much fun. For them, the situation is clear. Hashtag Russia invaded Ukraine. Hashtag Ukraine under attack. Please retweet. That is their most retweeted tweet. When the Russians decided to block food imports because of the Western sanctions, it was really apples that were on the table of the Polish government, and even the Polish president tweeted about apples, encouraging his countrymen to eat apples. To which the Russians replied, this is the Instagram account of Prime Minister Medvedev. He tweeted a picture of this apple tree stating that our apples are not worse than foreign ones. So part of this Twitter digital diplomacy on Twitter is also trolling. And the Estonian president, Toomas Hendrik Ilves, on a daily basis receives abuse from trolls. There is an army of trolls fueling this war. So here he is, heavy trolling today. What's up, trolls? And he even retweeted a series of tweets that he receives from trolls. When I thought his account had been hacked, actually, he just wanted to show his followers what kind of abuse he has to put up with. Last month, the Latvian foreign minister did his coming out on Twitter. I proudly announce I'm gay. Good luck, all of you. To which most of his colleagues congratulated him for this very bold step. Incidentally, the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia made fun of him. He's saying, if you have nothing else to be proud of, you can take pride in that just as well. So it's quite interesting. We have here government officials and personal attacks on Twitter. That's the new face of digital diplomacy. When the Prime Minister of Luxembourg came under attack from this right-wing Greek politician, this is a Google translation of his tweet in Greek, he diplomatically replied, Nick Nikolopoulos, hello, I heard you want to tell me something, but I don't speak Greek. Sorry. We've also seen another conflict almost breaking out on Twitter about the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Here's the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, tweeting the Armenian barbarians and vandals have razed the city of Agdam to the ground. The war is not only over, only the first stage of it is, but the second stage may start too. So we were thinking at that time he might even declare all-out war on Twitter. There is a war going on, of course, against Daesh, against ISIL, and ISIL, as John Kerry puts it, must be destroyed and will be destroyed. But, of course, Western leaders struggle with countering the propaganda of the radical Islamists also on the social networks. But also government officials will troll, do some trolling. This is when Apple announced that you can now sign PDF documents, the Estonian Prime Minister snarkily tweeted, Dear Apple, if you are interested in how files are really signed digitally, contact any Estonian. Best regards, Taavi, which is quite interesting to do this. So, in conclusion, I hope that we will continue to see world leaders active on social platforms, especially Twitter, that they will not be discouraged by the abuse that they are getting, and how they will continue to lead. And as the Prime Minister of Namibia said, be a leader, not a follower, lol. Thank you very, very much. With that, now, if the minister has arrived, I will leave now, else we can open to questions. I don't know.
No, let's have a seat together, actually. Please sit here. Sorry for that. So were any of these guys that you talked about tweeting you while you were on stage? Have you checked that? Did they send any message to you while you were on stage to congratulate about your performance?
I might get some, some feedback.
Some feedback?
I do. Actually, no, it's really interesting.
So do you actually talk, because you've been doing this for quite a long time, right? So I'm sure you have a lot of these world leaders, they are following you or are talking to you. Do you actually converse with them?
I do. No, seriously. So this Twitter study has a Twitter account at Diplomacy, and I'm very proud. I have 26,000 followers, just organically over the past 2.5 years, including 130 heads of state and government. These same people, actually, we're on the same level. We're in the top 10 most followed accounts by these world leaders, on the same level as The Economist, which makes me really happy. And every year, I basically send them a direct message saying, the next report comes out. Do you want embargoed advance copy? I also do that to the 1,000 journalists which follow the accounts. And guess what? It's over 30% reply. Yes, please. Not only are we now connected on Twitter, but I also have their emails. So it's absolutely interesting. Some people I do direct message, or they direct message me. And you're saying, what did you post there? You didn't get the full story. So, and apparently, as I said before, I'm not the only one. There is this back-channel diplomacy going on Twitter. Twitter is just one of many channels. You can send an email, but Twitter is I think, even if the world leaders are not tweeting themselves, the social media team is really very close to the cabinet. It's really in the heart of the government. Where,
You just mentioned that social media team. Are any of these leaders tweeting themselves?
Yeah. I mean, the ones I've shown, the Estonian president.
Yeah, but they're actually doing it.
They're actually writing and posting and hitting the send button.
Because you see sometimes they say they're doing it, and then you see pictures that clearly were not taken by them. They're taken by the PR team. So it's always going to...
Some have a very symbiotic relationship with their PA, and this is what you really need. Somebody who's very close to you who will then take the picture. You don't want to just take selfies, but somebody, who will help you. Maybe they'll sometimes write them, but no, I think world leaders, they have time on their hands when they travel, when they're in the car. I mean, they can just, they could theoretically just tweet, but you have to understand Twitter. And this is really important, is training. How do you get people to use Twitter themselves? When you can ask, the Minister of Economy if he tweets himself. It's kind of, it doesn't really look like it.
Yeah, probably not. Do you see any, since you talk about the Minister here in France, do you see any cultural differences across continents and countries in how they use Twitter? Do you see that yourself in your studies?
What is really interesting is that Latin American leaders are talking to each other. There are very few links to Latin American leaders following European leaders or even North Americans. Latin American leaders tweet exclusively in Spanish, are only connected to each other, but talk to each other. And so that's something that's interesting. Apart from that, I see foreign ministries who are ahead of the curve. That is number one is the Foreign Office, I would say, rather than maybe then second position the State Department. They'll kill me. But also we can see France very good, very present. So it's not only the Foreign Ministry but also all the embassies in Poland, Turkey, Mexico, Sweden, of course. So really making an effort to organize this network of digital diplomacy, because it's not only the Foreign Ministry's account, but they have 100, 200 embassies around the world. And what I find really interesting is what can we learn from that? How do you do this, communication that is, you let the embassies tweet. You don't have the legal and compliance department that has to check, 24 hours. So this is what these foreign ministries do.
Matthias, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.